The alarm sounds at a Soviet air base outside Moscow. A MiG-25 races down the runway, engines burning at full power, built for one purpose: to catch intruders no one else can reach. High above, the target is already there. The SR-71 Blackbird crosses the edge of Soviet airspace at more than Mach 3, flying so high the sky has turned dark. As the interceptor climbs past 70,000 feet, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The numbers keep rising, but the target stays higher: 80,000 feet, 85,000. The MiG reaches its limit while the Blackbird cruises calmly on. In that moment, Soviet pilots understand something shocking. This is not a contest of skill or bravery. It is a battle lost to altitude itself. The morning air at Domodedovo Air Base is cold and heavy, the kind that carries sound for long distances. On the far edge of the runway, a MiG-25 Foxbat sits low on its landing gear, broad wings stretched wide like a machine built for brute force rather than grace. Ground crews move with practiced speed, ladders pulled away, panels sealed, hands raised to signal readiness. This aircraft exists for one purpose only: to climb fast and run down anything that dares fly high over Soviet territory. Today, that purpose feels more urgent than ever. Inside the cockpit, the pilot settles into a narrow seat surrounded by gauges and warning lights. The pressure suit presses tightly against his shoulders and chest, stiff and uncomfortable even before the engines start. Breathing feels deliberate, controlled. The visor reflects rows of instruments and the dull gray sky outside. For years, briefings have spoken of the same intruder, the American reconnaissance aircraft that radar sees but fighters never reach. Each time it appears, it exposes a weakness. Today is supposed to be different. The Foxbat was built as an answer to fear. In the early years of the Cold War, Soviet leaders watched American aircraft push higher and farther, gathering intelligence without consequence. The response was simple in theory: build something faster than anything else in the sky. The result is this machine, powered by enormous engines that drink fuel at a frightening rate and trade elegance for raw climb performance. On paper, it can reach Mach 3 and fly higher than most pilots ever imagine. In the briefing room, the numbers sound reassuring. In the cockpit, they feel less certain. The engines ignite with a deep metallic roar that vibrates through the pilot's spine. Heat floods the cabin as the aircraft begins to roll. The MiG gathers speed quickly, far faster than older fighters, and the runway blurs beneath the nose. When the wheels lift, the Foxbat climbs steeply, almost violently, as if trying to escape gravity by force alone. Below, the airfield shrinks into lines and shapes. Ahead, the sky grows darker with altitude. Ground control feeds information through the headset. Radar has detected the intruder approaching the northern sector. The track is steady and fast. The target is already high, cruising near the edge of what Soviet aircraft consider possible. The pilot adjusts his climb, pushing the engines harder, watching the altimeter spin upward. 40,000 feet, 50,000, the aircraft still responds well, but the control inputs feel heavier, less precise. This is the world where the Foxbat begins to struggle. The air thins quickly, and lift becomes less reliable. At these heights, the aircraft depends more on engine thrust than on wings. Every kilogram of fuel burn matters, every second counts. The pilot feels the strain in the controls and in his own body, pressed back by acceleration and held in place by the rigid suit. Somewhere far above, invisible to the naked eye, the SR-71 Blackbird is already running. It does not rush in the way the MiG does. It cruises, smooth and steady, built to live where others only pass briefly. Its pilots have settled into a routine that feels almost calm, even while traveling faster than a rifle bullet. The Foxbat pilot does not know their faces or their names, only the numbers on his instruments that say they are out of reach. As the MiG climbs past 60,000 feet, the sky begins to change color. Blue fades into something darker, deeper, a shade that feels unnatural. The horizon curves slightly, a reminder of how high the aircraft has gone. The engines scream at near maximum output, fuel consumption climbing to levels that leave little room for error. The mission clock ticks forward, silent but unforgiving. Radar updates continue, but the picture is frustratingly vague. The target remains above and ahead, crossing the defended zone with confidence. The pilot arms his missiles, more out of habit than hope. At these altitudes, guidance becomes unreliable. The thin air robs radar of clarity and steals control authority from the aircraft. Still, orders are orders and the attempt must be made. 70,000 feet. The Foxbat reaches a region where flight feels more like balancing than flying. Small corrections produce delayed reactions. Large movements risk disaster. The aircraft is operating on the edge of its envelope, a place engineers warned about and pilots respect. Pushing harder might gain another 1,000 feet, maybe two, but it could also mean losing everything. The pilot strains to look upward through the canopy. For a moment, there's nothing. Then, a faint shape appears against the darkened sky. A long black form, leaving a thin contrail that seems almost delicate. It is there, and then it is gone, accelerating away with ease. The sight lasts only seconds, but it is enough. The realization settles in with brutal clarity. Even at full effort, the MiG cannot climb into the same world. Fuel warnings begin to flash. The engines are still strong, but time has run out. Ground control orders the pilot to disengage and descend. The Foxbat turns reluctantly, nose dipping back toward thicker air. As altitude decreases, control slowly returns, but the frustration remains. The intruder has passed again, untouched. Back on the ground, the landing feels heavy. The aircraft rolls to a stop, engines winding down, heat shimmering around the fuselage. Ground crews approach, faces unreadable. In the debrief room, the atmosphere is tense. Maps cover the walls, red lines tracing the path of the intruder. Officers ask precise questions, noting altitudes, speeds, timings. The answers are always the same. The MiG performed as designed. The pilot flew correctly. The problem lies somewhere else. This is not the first failure, and it will not be the last. For years, Soviet air defense has tracked these flights, launching interceptors that climb desperately and fall short every time. Each attempt adds data, but the conclusion grows harder to ignore. The American aircraft is not just fast. It is operating above assumptions that guided Soviet design choices. Engineers pore over reports, comparing theoretical ceilings to real-world performance. The numbers no longer line up. The intruder is flying at 85,000 feet, sometimes higher, where the air density drops to a fraction of what fighters are built to handle. At that height, missiles lose energy quickly. Interceptors lose lift. Physics becomes an enemy. For the pilots, the effect is personal. They fly the fastest interceptor their country has ever produced, yet they feel powerless. Training emphasizes precision and discipline, but no amount of skill can overcome the limits of materials and engines. Still, they continue to scramble when ordered. Each launch is a test of pride as much as capability. The Foxbat itself shows signs of strain. Its structure is strong but heavy, built to withstand heat and speed rather than finesse. Maintenance crews inspect it carefully after each high-altitude attempt, checking engines pushed to their limits and airframes stressed by extreme conditions. The aircraft is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that the opponent lives just beyond that design. As the days pass, the pattern repeats. Radar contact, scramble, climb, brief glimpse, failure. The phrase begins to circulate quietly among pilots and controllers. They cannot get close, not because of lack of courage or effort, but because the sky itself belongs to the intruder. This growing awareness marks a turning point. The Soviet response will not be to abandon the chase, but to rethink it. Questions emerge about materials, about engines, about whether altitude has been underestimated as a weapon. Across the ocean, American crews continue their missions, aware of the attempts below but confident in their margins. The story behind the aircraft that humiliated Soviet interceptors begins many years before the Foxbat waits on a frozen runway. In the late 1950s, the balance of the Cold War still feels uncertain. American leaders rely heavily on aerial reconnaissance to understand what the Soviet Union is building and where. The primary tool for this mission is the U-2, a high-altitude aircraft that seems untouchable at first. It flies higher than fighters and above most air defenses. For a short time, it works. That illusion ends when surface-to-air missiles improve. In the year 1960, a U-2 piloted by Francis Gary Powers is shot down deep inside Soviet territory. The wreckage is displayed to the world, and the pilot is captured alive. The message is clear. High altitude alone is no longer protection. The United States suddenly realizes that its most important intelligence tool is vulnerable, and that vulnerability could lead to war if miscalculation follows. Inside the Pentagon and the intelligence community, the response is urgent. They do not want a small improvement over existing aircraft. They want something radically different. The requirement sounds almost impossible. The new aircraft must fly higher than missiles can reach and faster than interceptors can chase. It must operate for long distances and bring back detailed imagery. And it must do this repeatedly, not as an experiment, but as a routine mission. The task falls to a small group inside Lockheed known for solving problems others avoid. At the center of this effort is Clarence Kelly Johnson. Johnson has a reputation for blunt honesty and for building aircraft that look strange but work perfectly. He leads the Skunk Works team, a group that thrives on secrecy, speed, and unconventional thinking. When Johnson reviews the requirement, he does not argue about whether it is possible. He focuses on how to bend physics just enough to make it real. Johnson understands something crucial. If the aircraft relies on maneuvering or fighting, it will eventually lose. Missiles will improve. Radars will get sharper. Interceptors will climb higher. The only reliable defense is to live in a part of the sky where nothing else can stay long enough to fight. Speed combined with extreme altitude becomes the guiding idea. Early design studies explore shapes that look nothing like traditional fighters. Long, slender bodies. Wide chines that blend wings into fuselage. Everything is optimized for stable flight at Mach 3 and above. At those speeds, air behaves differently. Shockwaves cling to the aircraft. Heat becomes a structural problem rather than a comfort issue. Johnson and his engineers quickly realize that aluminum, the standard material for aircraft, will not survive. It softens at temperatures far below what sustained Mach 3 flight produces. The solution is titanium, a metal strong, light, and resistant to heat. But titanium creates a new set of problems. It is difficult to machine. It reacts badly with common chemicals. Even chlorine in tap water can cause corrosion. Tools wear out quickly when cutting it. At the time, few American factories have experience working with it at scale. The irony is sharp. Much of the world's available titanium comes from the Soviet Union itself, forcing the United States to purchase it indirectly through shell companies without revealing its true purpose. Inside Skunk Works facilities, new manufacturing methods are invented almost daily. Workers learn to handle titanium carefully, using distilled water and custom tools. Panels are shaped with precision because gaps that seem like flaws on the ground will close in the air as the aircraft heats and expands. Johnson accepts something that would be unacceptable on other planes. The aircraft will leak fuel on the runway. Only when it reaches operating temperature will the structure seal itself properly. This is not a mistake. It is part of the design. Engines present an even greater challenge. Conventional jet engines struggle at extreme speeds. At Mach 3, inlet air is so hot and compressed that compressors risk stalling or tearing themselves apart. The answer comes from an innovative engine and inlet system that blurs the line between jet and ramjet. The Pratt & Whitney J58 is built to handle conditions no engine has faced before. At cruise speed, much of the thrust comes not from the engine core, but from the inlet itself, which slows and compresses incoming air with carefully controlled shockwaves. The aircraft that emerges from this effort looks almost unreal. Long, sharp, painted a dark blue that absorbs heat and reduces glare. Its shape is dictated by physics rather than aesthetics. When it finally flies in the mid-1960s, the performance is astonishing. Test pilots report smooth handling even at speeds where other aircraft would shake violently. The plane seems happiest when it is fast, high, and left alone. Operational planning takes shape quickly. The aircraft is named the SR-71 Blackbird. Its mission is reconnaissance over denied territory, places where satellites cannot always provide timely or flexible coverage. It will not sneak quietly through enemy airspace. It will announce itself with speed. When detected, it will simply outrun the threat. This philosophy changes everything about how missions are flown. Crews train not to evade missiles with turns or countermeasures, but to maintain energy. If a missile launch is detected, the response is not panic. The response is to push the throttles forward and let physics do the work. At Mach 3, the missile bleeds speed faster than the aircraft does. It runs out of energy long before it can close the distance. Altitude is just as important. The Blackbird routinely operates above 80,000 feet, a region where air density drops dramatically. At those heights, control surfaces become less effective for other aircraft. Engines lose thrust. Missiles struggle to track targets that leave little heat contrast against the cold sky. The SR-71 is built specifically to live there. Its systems designed around that environment from the beginning. For the pilots, the experience is unlike anything else. They wear full-pressure suits similar to those used by astronauts. Pre-flight checks take hours. Once airborne, They refuel immediately because the aircraft cannot be filled completely on the ground without leaking excessively. Only after refueling do they climb and accelerate, slowly at first, then relentlessly. As speed increases, the aircraft changes character. Vibrations fade, controls feel lighter. The Blackbird settles into its cruise as if it has found its natural habitat. Outside, the sky darkens. Below, the curve of the Earth becomes visible. Inside, instruments glow softly, and the crew monitors temperatures that would destroy other aircraft. This design choice directly shapes the encounters that frustrate Soviet pilots years later. While interceptors like the MiG-25 are built to sprint upward and attack briefly, the SR-71 is built to stay. It does not rush through its mission window. It cruises calmly, gathering intelligence across vast areas, knowing that anything chasing it is already at a disadvantage. The Americans understand the risk. A failure at these speeds and altitudes leaves almost no margin for survival. Unstarts in the engine can produce violent yaw. Structural fatigue accumulates with every mission. Maintenance crews inspect the aircraft obsessively, repairing cracks and monitoring components stressed by heat cycles. The Blackbird is not invincible. It is simply operating where threats cannot reach it in time. This difference in philosophy explains the shock experienced by Soviet pilots. They assume that if an aircraft is fast, it can be intercepted by something faster. If it is high, it can be reached by climbing harder. The SR-71 breaks that logic. It combines both in a way that shifts the battle into a narrow envelope where physics favors only one side. By the time Foxbats are scrambling from bases near Moscow, the Blackbird has already proven its concept dozens of times. It has flown over the edges of hostile territory, detected missiles, and left them far behind. Each mission reinforces the same lesson. Speed is protection. Altitude is sanctuary. Together, they create a space where traditional air defense struggles to function. By the mid-1960s, the SR-71 has moved from an experimental marvel to an operational tool. At Beale Air Force Base, the aircraft sits inside special hangars, surrounded by technicians who understand that this machine lives on the edge of what metal and fuel can endure. Every mission begins long before the engines start. Planning rooms fill with maps, weather charts, and threat assessments. Routes are drawn with care, not to avoid detection, but to manage timing and fuel in a world where mistakes cannot be fixed later. For the crews, the day starts hours before sunrise. Pilots and reconnaissance systems officers move slowly as medical staff help them into full pressure suits. The suits are stiff and heavy, restricting movement and making even simple actions feel deliberate. Breathing air flows through hoses and valves. Once sealed, the outside world feels distant, muffled, as if already leaving Earth behind. This equipment is not for comfort. At operational altitude, cabin pressure equals conditions above 60,000 feet. A failure would mean unconsciousness in seconds. Walking across the tarmac in these suits feels awkward and exposed. Ground crews guide them carefully up ladders and into cockpits designed around efficiency rather than space. Once strapped in, movement becomes limited. The canopy closes, sealing the crew inside a narrow world of instruments, switches, and soft mechanical sounds. There is no room for error and no room for panic. When the engines ignite, the aircraft does not leap forward like a fighter. It accelerates smoothly, deliberately. The Blackbird is heavy when cold, loaded with fuel that will soon begin to leak through seams designed to close only when heated. On the runway, dark streaks of fuel mark where previous missions have dripped. This strange sight alarms visitors, but for those who work here, it is normal. Takeoff is long and fast. The aircraft lifts cleanly and climbs away, staying subsonic at first. Almost immediately, the crew heads toward a tanker. Aerial refueling occurs early because the aircraft cannot be fully fueled on the ground. This moment demands precision. Two aircraft meet in the sky. One fragile and strange, the other familiar and steady. Once connected, fuel flows, and the Blackbird becomes heavy again, ready for the climb. After refueling, the real mission begins. The nose turns toward the planned route. The aircraft climbs steadily, passing through altitudes where other jets would level off. Mach 1 comes and goes without drama. Mach 2 follows. The engines change tone as the inlet systems adjust, shockwaves locking into place with a deep thump felt through the airframe. The aircraft accelerates further, settling into a cruise that feels smooth and almost gentle. At Mach 3, the Blackbird feels different from anything else. Vibrations fade. Control inputs become light. The aircraft seems to ride on a cushion of compressed air. Outside, the sky darkens from blue to deep indigo. The horizon curves clearly. Below, cloud layers flatten into a textured blanket. Cities and terrain blur into abstract patterns. Inside the cockpit, temperatures rise steadily. Skin panels heat until they glow faintly in infrared, though invisible to the naked eye. This is where the Blackbird lives. Above 80,000 feet, the world belongs to it alone. The crew monitors engine temperatures, inlet positions, and fuel flow with constant focus. There is little conversation. Each person knows their role. The reconnaissance systems officer manages cameras and sensors that can photograph vast areas with astonishing clarity. Objects smaller than a car can be identified from this height. Entire regions pass beneath the aircraft in minutes. Despite the calm inside the cockpit, danger is always present. Warning systems watch for radar emissions and missile launches. When a threat appears, it does not come with drama. A light flashes, a tone sounds, the response is measured. The aircraft does not turn or dive. It accelerates. Throttles move forward, and the Blackbird gains speed where others lose it. At these velocities, missiles struggle. They climb steeply, burn fuel rapidly, and then fall behind, defeated by physics rather than countermeasures. Over time, this pattern repeats often enough that it becomes routine. Missiles are launched. Interceptors scramble. The Blackbird continues. Each successful mission reinforces confidence in the design. Crews trust the aircraft, but never completely. They understand how narrow the margins are. An engine on start at Mach 3 can produce violent yaw forces. Structural fatigue accumulates invisibly. Every flight pushes metal closer to its limits. Maintenance crews play a crucial role in keeping this trust alive. After each mission, the aircraft undergoes detailed inspections. Panels are removed, cracks are measured and repaired. Engines are examined for signs of stress. The Blackbird requires constant attention, not because it is fragile, but because it operates in conditions that expose every weakness. This work is slow and meticulous. There are no shortcuts. For the men who fly it, the Blackbird becomes more than an aircraft. It is a system that demands respect. Training is extensive. New crews spend years learning procedures, emergency responses, and mission planning. They practice handling unstarts in simulators and in the air. They rehearse what to do if one engine fails or if cabin pressure drops. Every scenario is drilled until reactions become instinctive. This professionalism shapes the encounters that Soviet radar operators observe from the ground. When SR-71 appears on screens, it does not behave like a nervous intruder. It follows its route calmly, speed steady, altitude constant. Even when interceptors rise to meet it, the aircraft does not deviate. This behavior sends a message as powerful as any weapon. It suggests control and confidence. On the Soviet side, this confidence becomes a source of irritation. Air defense units track the Blackbird carefully. They note its speed, altitude, and timing. They scramble MiG-25 interceptors and carefully plan attempts, hoping to catch the aircraft at a vulnerable moment. Perhaps during acceleration, perhaps during a turn. But the Blackbird rarely offers such moments. Its flight profile is designed to minimize them. From the American perspective, each mission provides valuable intelligence. Naval bases, missile sites, airfields, and troop movements are photographed and analyzed. The speed of the aircraft allows it to collect data over enormous areas in a single sortie. This information flows quickly to analysts and decision-makers. In an era before reliable real-time satellite imagery, this capability is priceless. As missions continue into the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Blackbird builds a record that seems almost unreal. Dozens of missile launches. Hundreds of intercept attempts. None successful. The aircraft returns every time. This record is not public, but within military circles, it shapes planning and confidence. Still, there is no sense of invulnerability among the crews. They know that if something goes wrong, rescue is unlikely. At operational altitude, ejection seats offer little chance of survival. Pressure suits provide seconds, not minutes. Every flight carries this knowledge quietly in the background. It sharpens focus rather than causing fear. The contrast with Soviet interceptors grows sharper. The MiG-25 is designed for short bursts of extreme performance. It climbs fast, accelerates quickly, and carries heavy missiles. But it cannot stay long at the edge of its envelope. Fuel burns too quickly. Controls become unreliable. Pilots must turn back before the Blackbird even notices them. This difference in endurance defines the struggle. The Blackbird does not win by fighting. It wins by refusing to enter a fight at all. It occupies a narrow band of speed and altitude where opponents can only visit briefly, if at all. Every Soviet attempt to close the gap highlights this reality. Inside American briefing rooms, these encounters are studied carefully. Crews review radar tracks and missile data. They adjust routes and timing to maintain advantage. The aircraft is improved incrementally. Sensors become more capable. Electronic warning systems grow more sensitive. Procedures evolve. The Blackbird remains ahead not because it stands still, but because it keeps moving forward. By the time Soviet pilots voice their frustration openly, the pattern is firmly established. The SR-71 has turned speed into habit and altitude into territory. It has transformed reconnaissance from a risky gamble into a controlled operation, albeit one conducted at extreme cost and effort. Inside Soviet command centers, the repeated failure to stop the SR-71 begins to feel like a slow, public wound. Radar screens show the same pattern again and again. A high-speed track appears, moving with confidence along the edges of defended airspace. Interceptors scramble, missiles are prepared. And then, just as predictably, the track exits the screen untouched. For a system built on the promise of total air defense, this is deeply unsettling. The responsibility for closing this gap falls heavily on Soviet engineers and planners. They already know that traditional fighters cannot solve the problem. The answer must be an interceptor built specifically for extreme altitude and speed. That aircraft is already in service, the MiG-25. On paper, it looks formidable. It can climb faster than anything else in the Soviet inventory. It can reach speeds above Mach 3. It carries large missiles designed to destroy high-flying targets. In theory, it should work. The problem is that theory and reality diverge sharply at the edge of the atmosphere. Pilots quickly learn that the Foxbat's impressive numbers come with severe limits. At very high altitude, the aircraft becomes difficult to control. The air is so thin that wings generate little lift. Engines produce thrust, but only just enough to maintain altitude. Any aggressive maneuver risks a stall or worse. Pilots describe this region as flying on engines alone, balanced delicately between climb and fall. Training for SR-71 intercepts becomes intense. Crews practice precise climb profiles, timed to the second. Ground control plays a central role, guiding pilots along narrow corridors of altitude and speed. There is no room for improvisation. The MiG must arrive at a specific point in space at exactly the right moment. If it is early, fuel is wasted waiting. If it is late, the target is already gone. One such pilot is Lieutenant Colonel Miyake, based near Moscow. He is experienced, disciplined, and deeply aware of the challenge. His briefings emphasize timing and restraint rather than aggression. The goal is not to dogfight. The goal is to reach altitude, point the nose, and launch missiles before fuel and physics force a retreat. When an alert comes, everything moves fast. Sirens sound, crews run, engines start with a violent roar. The MiG accelerates down the runway and climbs almost vertically, pushed by massive engines that consume fuel at a terrifying rate. Within minutes, the aircraft is above 40,000 feet. The climb continues, 50,000, 60,000. The sky darkens, and the controls grow heavy. Ground control feeds updates continuously. The SR-71 is ahead and above, moving at extraordinary speed. The numbers coming over the radio are precise but discouraging. 75,000 feet, 80,000. The MiG continues to climb, but the margin shrinks rapidly. Fuel warnings appear sooner than anyone would like. At these heights, the cockpit feels isolated from the world below. The Earth curves visibly, the sky takes on a deep, unnatural color. The aircraft trembles slightly as engines strain near their limits. Control inputs feel delayed, as if the aircraft is thinking before responding. The pilot must resist the urge to force it higher. Pushing too hard could mean losing everything. Radar search becomes difficult. The thin air reduces performance. The target appears intermittently, sometimes not at all. Missiles are armed, but the firing window is narrow and uncertain. Even if a launch occurs, the missile must climb steeply into air that offers little guidance and low energy. Many pilots know, even before pressing the trigger, that the odds are poor. On one intercept attempt in the early 1970s, Miyake pushes his MiG to its absolute ceiling. The altimeter creeps upward toward 80,000 feet. Controls feel almost useless. The aircraft holds altitude only because the engines are screaming at maximum output. Fuel drains away rapidly. There is no room for another climb attempt. Ahead and above, a dark shape flashes briefly against the sky. A contrail stretches behind it, thin and elegant. Then it accelerates away, leaving nothing but empty air. The order to disengage follows quickly. The MiG turns back toward denser air, engines throttled down to save what fuel remains. The descent brings relief to the controls, but not to the mind. Another attempt has failed. Another confirmation that the target lives just beyond reach. Back on the ground, debriefings grow more serious. Pilots report the same experience. The MiG reaches its limits before the target does. Engineers analyze data carefully. They confirm what pilots already feel. The SR-71 is operating at altitudes higher than expected, sometimes above 85,000 feet. At those heights, the Foxbat cannot maneuver or sustain a firing position. This realization sends shock waves through Soviet military leadership. The interceptor program was meant to restore balance. Instead, it reveals a gap that is not easily closed. Engineers study American design choices with frustration and admiration. The extensive use of titanium, the unusual engine and inlet system, the willingness to accept complexity and cost in exchange for performance. These are areas where Soviet industry struggles, constrained by different priorities and resources. Still, there is no question of giving up. Intercept attempts continue. Each scramble serves a purpose, even if success seems unlikely. Pilots gain experience flying at the very edge of the envelope. Ground control refines tracking techniques. Data is collected, analyzed, and fed back into design bureaus. The chase becomes a form of research conducted at full scale and full risk. Psychologically, the effect on pilots is complex. They are proud to fly one of the fastest aircraft in the world. They know few others could handle it, yet they also feel a sense of helplessness. Speed alone is not enough. Altitude alone is not enough. The Blackbird combines both in a way that leaves little room for counterplay. American crews are aware of these attempts, though often only through instrument readings. Warning systems detect radar locks and missile launches. Electronic displays show interceptors climbing far below. From the cockpit, the response feels almost detached. Maintain course. Maintain speed. Monitor systems. The aircraft does the rest. This contrast deepens the sense of imbalance. On one side, pilots strain against limits, fighting physics and fuel. On the other, crews ride a machine designed to make such efforts futile. The conflict is not dramatic in a cinematic sense. There are no twisting dogfights or explosions. Instead, it unfolds quietly in numbers, charts, and thin air. By the mid-1970s, Soviet analysts begin to acknowledge internally what pilots already know. Conventional interceptors cannot reliably engage the SR-71 at its operational altitude. Missiles lack the reach and energy. Aircraft lack the endurance and control. New ideas are discussed, including improved interceptors and advanced missile concepts, but solutions remain distant. This period marks a turning point. The Foxbat, once seen as the answer, is now understood as only a partial response. The Blackbird has exposed a weakness not just in hardware, but in assumptions. Speed was prioritized with the expectation that altitude would follow. The Americans inverted that logic, building an aircraft that made altitude the battlefield itself. As intercept attempts continue, they carry less expectation of success and more of obligation. Pilots launch because they must. Controllers track because it is their duty. Each encounter reinforces the same lesson. The sky above 80,000 feet belongs to the intruder. By the late 1970s, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Every intercept attempt ends the same way, with Soviet aircraft turning back while the SR-71 continues its mission untouched. What began as frustration slowly hardens into understanding. The problem is no longer execution. It is not pilot skill, timing, or courage. It is a fundamental mismatch between what Soviet interceptors can do and where the Blackbird chooses to fly. Inside Soviet intelligence and air defense headquarters, analysts begin to review years of data in detail. Radar tracks are overlaid, altitude charts compared, fuel curves examined. The numbers line up neatly to deny. The SR-71 is not flirting with the upper edge of Soviet capability. It is operating comfortably beyond it. At 85,000 feet, sometimes higher, it occupies a layer of the atmosphere that Soviet planners once believed was impractical for sustained flight. This realization changes the tone of internal discussions. earlier optimism fades. Engineers and officers speak more carefully, more honestly. Reports acknowledge that the MiG-25 meets its design goals, but that those goals were based on incorrect assumptions about the enemy. Speed alone does not grant dominance at extreme altitude. Engines can push an aircraft upward, but control and endurance disappear quickly in thin air. The Blackbird was designed around that reality. The Foxbat was not. For pilots, the shift is deeply personal. Many of them have risked their lives repeatedly, climbing into a region where small mistakes become fatal. They have trusted their aircraft and their training, only to discover that the target lives in a different world. The phrase circulates quietly among squadrons. They cannot get close. It is not spoken as an excuse, but as a statement of fact. On the American side, the SR-71 program continues with steady confidence. Crews are aware that Soviet interceptors are trying, but the encounters rarely feel dramatic. Warning systems light up, then go quiet. Missile alerts appear, then fade as the aircraft accelerates. The Blackbird does not dodge. It simply keeps going. Each mission reinforces the idea that the aircraft's greatest defense is consistency. Still, there is no sense of carelessness. Crews understand how fragile their safety margin truly is. At Mach 3 and extreme altitude, there is no room for improvisation. A single system failure can cascade rapidly. The aircraft's titanium skin expands and contracts with every flight, accumulating stress. Engines operate in a regime few others ever approach. Maintenance crews work tirelessly to catch problems early, knowing that prevention is the only real protection. As the years pass, Soviet intelligence becomes increasingly interested in the details behind the Blackbird's success. Analysts focus on materials, engine design, and operational doctrine. They compare this to their own industrial capabilities and face uncomfortable conclusions. Titanium is scarce and difficult to work with at scale. Precision manufacturing is slower. Electronics lag behind in certain areas. These gaps matter more at the extremes of performance than anywhere else. The desire to understand grows urgent. Every radar return and every pilot debrief is scrutinized. But without direct access to the aircraft, many questions remain unanswered. How does it manage heat over long missions? How do its engines maintain efficiency across such a wide speed range? How do its crews manage fuel and stress with such precision? Then, in the mid-1970s, an unexpected event provides answers. A Soviet MiG-25 pilot defects to the west, landing his aircraft in Japan. The news spreads quickly through intelligence communities on both sides. For the Americans and their allies, the opportunity is enormous. For the Soviets, it is deeply embarrassing. The aircraft is examined in detail by American and Japanese engineers. Panels are removed, systems are photographed and measured. The findings are surprising. The MiG-25 is fast, but it is also heavy. Its structure relies heavily on steel alloys rather than titanium. This choice gives strength and heat resistance, but at the cost of weight and maneuverability. The electronics are robust but bulky, relying on older technologies chosen for reliability rather than efficiency. This examination confirms what SR-71 crews already sense in the air. The Foxbat is built to sprint briefly into extreme conditions, not to live there. It can touch the edge of the Blackbird's world, but it cannot stay. Fuel consumption and control limitations force it back long before a stable intercept can occur. The defector's testimony adds a human dimension to the technical data. He describes briefings where pilots are shown grainy images of the Blackbird and told that interception is theoretically possible under perfect conditions: early detection, ideal timing. Minimal fuel loss during climb, no acceleration by the target. Pilots listen, but most understand the reality. Too many conditions must align. Too many things must go wrong for the other side. This confirmation resonates strongly within Soviet air defense circles. It validates years of pilot experience and frustration. It also sharpens the sense of urgency. If the MiG-25 cannot solve the problem, then something else must. At the same time, the psychological impact on Soviet pilots is significant. They are professionals, trained to defend their airspace and intercept intruders. Knowing that an enemy aircraft routinely crosses their borders without fear undermines confidence. Yet it also breeds a kind of respect. The Blackbird is not dismissed as propaganda or exaggeration. It is acknowledged as a genuine achievement. American crews feel a different psychological weight. They know they are winning this contest, but they also know how thin the line is between success and disaster. Stories circulate quietly about instarts, violent engine disruptions that can yaw the aircraft suddenly at Mach 3. Crews rehearse these scenarios endlessly. They trust each other completely, knowing that survival depends on coordination and calm. By the early 1980s, the Cold War landscape begins to shift. Technology advances on both sides. Satellites improve. New interceptors are proposed. The Soviet Union introduces the MiG-31, a more advanced aircraft with better radar and longer-range missiles. On paper, it promises improved high-altitude performance and better chances against fast targets. For a brief moment, hope returns. Perhaps this new interceptor can finally challenge the Blackbird. Training begins. Intercept attempts resume with renewed focus. But the fundamental problem remains. Even when the MiG-31 reaches impressive altitudes, it struggles to maneuver effectively. The SR-71 detects it early and simply accelerates, extending a small speed advantage that becomes decisive over time. The pattern repeats itself, now with a new aircraft playing the same role as the Foxbat before it. The gap is narrowed slightly, but not enough. The Blackbird still owns the upper edge of the atmosphere. Within Soviet command, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. There is no practical conventional counter to the SR-71. Missiles cannot reach it reliably. Interceptors cannot engage it effectively. Exotic ideas are discussed, including specialized high-altitude weapons and even nuclear options, but these remain theoretical and politically dangerous. This acceptance does not mean surrender. Intercept attempts continue, partly as training, partly as a show of vigilance. They send a message that Soviet airspace is watched and defended, even if the defense cannot always succeed. For the pilots involved, these missions remain demanding and dangerous, regardless of outcome. As this chapter draws toward its end, the shape of the story becomes clear. The contest is no longer about who can build the faster aircraft. It is about who understood the battlefield correctly from the beginning. The Americans chose to fight where physics favored them. The Soviets responded with skill and determination, but within limits set by earlier assumptions. By the mid-1980s, the contest between the SR-71 and Soviet air defenses has reached a quiet conclusion, even if no one announces it openly. Intercept attempts still occur. Radar operators still track the familiar high-speed line cutting across their screens. Pilots still scramble when ordered, but the expectation of success has faded. What remains is routine duty and an unspoken acceptance of limits. For Soviet commanders, the lesson is uncomfortable but clear. The Blackbird cannot be stopped with conventional means. Interceptors reach their ceilings and turn back. Missiles burn out before they can close the distance. Every calculation leads to the same result. The aircraft lives in a narrow layer of sky where physics itself acts as a shield. The introduction of the MiG-31 reflects this reality. It is faster, more capable, and better equipped than the Foxbat. Its radar can track targets at long range. Its missiles fly farther and higher. On paper, it looks like the solution that was missing. In practice, it narrows the gap but does not close it. At extreme altitude, maneuvering is still limited. The SR-71 detects the interceptor early and responds in the same way it always has, by accelerating and maintaining altitude. For the pilots flying these intercepts, the experience is familiar. The climb is aggressive. The fuel burns quickly. The controls grow heavy. The target remains just beyond reach. Even when the MiG-31 reaches impressive heights, it cannot sustain the position long enough to force an engagement. The chase ends not with combat, but with fuel warnings and a return to base. Inside Soviet intelligence circles, the Blackbird is now studied less as a threat to be defeated and more as a benchmark. Analysts examine how American engineers solved problems that Soviet industry struggled with. The use of titanium at scale, the precision required to build engines that function across such extreme conditions. The willingness to accept high cost and complexity in exchange for performance. These factors are noted carefully and influence future research and development. For American crews, the later years of SR-71 operations carry a different weight. The aircraft has proven itself repeatedly, but the danger never disappears. Every flight remains a calculated risk. Unstarts still occur. Structural fatigue still accumulates. Maintenance crews continue their painstaking inspections, knowing that small flaws can become catastrophic at Mach 3. Missions expand beyond the Soviet Union. The Blackbird flies over the Middle East, monitoring regional conflicts. It operates along the borders of China. It supports American operations during crises where timely intelligence is essential. In each case, the same advantages apply. Speed and altitude allow the aircraft to collect data where others cannot. One of the aircraft's most important strengths becomes flexibility. Satellites follow predictable orbits. Adversaries learn when they pass overhead and adapt accordingly. The SR-71 can be launched on short notice, fly a tailored route, and return with intelligence within hours. This capability proves valuable again and again, especially in fast-moving situations. Despite this success, pressure builds quietly within the United States Air Force. The Blackbird is expensive to operate. Each aircraft costs tens of millions of dollars to build, and far more over its lifetime. The specialized fuel is costly. Training crews takes years. Maintenance demands skilled technicians and dedicated facilities. As satellite technology improves and unmanned systems begin to emerge, some leaders question whether the program is still justified. Supporters argue passionately that the SR-71 offers something machines in orbit cannot. Human crews can adapt in real time. They can investigate unexpected activity. They can respond to intelligence needs immediately rather than waiting for orbital timing. Critics counter that budgets are finite and that newer technologies promise similar coverage at lower cost. This debate continues into the late 1980s and early 1990s, even as the Cold War itself begins to wind down. Political tensions ease. Arms control agreements are signed. The sense of constant confrontation fades. In this changing environment, the justification for an aircraft designed to penetrate the most heavily defended airspace in the world becomes harder to sustain. The final operational years of the SR-71 include some of its most demanding missions. During the build-up to conflict in the Persian Gulf, Blackbirds fly long sorties from distant bases, requiring multiple aerial refuelings. They gather critical intelligence on enemy positions and defenses. Once again, air defenses track them helplessly as they pass overhead. Eventually, the decision is made. Budget pressures and shifting priorities lead to retirement. In the late 1990s, the last operational SR-71 mission is flown. The aircraft lands and shuts down, ending a career that spans more than 3 decades. Not a single Blackbird has been lost to enemy action. Hundreds of intercept attempts. Numerous missile launches. 0 successful engagements. This record is extraordinary. No other manned reconnaissance aircraft has operated so deep in hostile airspace for so long without being brought down. The achievement belongs not only to the aircraft, but to the people behind it. Engineers who solved unprecedented problems. Technicians who kept fragile systems alive under extreme stress. Pilots and reconnaissance officers who trusted each other completely at the edge of survivability. For Soviet pilots who spent years chasing the Blackbird, the end of its service brings mixed feelings. There is relief that the contest is over, but also a sense of respect. In interviews after the collapse of the Soviet Union, many speak openly about their experiences. They acknowledge the frustration, the repeated failures, and the quiet admiration for an aircraft that redefined what was possible. They describe the chase not as a humiliation, but as a lesson. It pushed them to fly better, to understand the limits of their machines, and to confront the realities of high-altitude flight. It influenced later Soviet and Russian aircraft design, particularly in the areas of speed, materials, and high-altitude performance. For American crews, memories of the Blackbird are deeply personal. They remember the pressure suits, the long pre-flight checks, the strange calm of Mach 3 cruise. They remember watching warning lights and trusting the aircraft to do what it was designed to do. They remember the knowledge that if something failed, help was far away. The human element remains central to this story. On both sides, these were professionals doing dangerous work in service of their countries. The Cold War placed them in opposition, but not in hatred. Many later meetings between former adversaries reveal mutual respect. Pilots compare experiences, laugh about shared fears, and acknowledge the skill required to fly at such extremes. The SR-71 also leaves a broader legacy. Its development pushes advances in materials science, engine design, and systems integration that benefit future aerospace projects. Research conducted during its service informs later work on hypersonic flight and high-altitude operations. Even after retirement, a few aircraft continue flying with civilian agencies for research, extending their contribution beyond military use. Today, preserved Blackbirds sit in museums, silent and dark, their long shape still striking. Visitors stand beneath them and struggle to imagine the heat, speed, and isolation they once endured. The aircraft no longer leaks fuel onto runways or streaks across radar screens, but its story remains powerful. For historians, the duel between the Senior 71 and Soviet interceptors represents a defining example of Cold War competition. It shows how assumptions shape outcomes. The Soviets built extraordinary aircraft focused on speed, believing altitude would follow. The Americans built an aircraft that treated altitude as territory and speed as insurance. That difference proved decisive. The phrase that circulates among MiG pilots captures the truth simply: they could not get close. Not because they lacked skill or courage, but because the battle was fought in a place their machines could not remain. Physics chose a side long before missiles or guns came into play. As technology continues to evolve, the Blackbird's records still stand. No operational manned aircraft has matched its sustained combination of speed and altitude. Unmanned systems and satellites now dominate reconnaissance, but they operate under different constraints and offer different trade-offs. The Senior 71 belonged to a unique moment when human pilots pushed themselves and their machines to the absolute edge. The story ends not with an explosion or a dramatic victory, but with quiet retirement and lasting influence. The Blackbird flew higher and faster than anything else in its time and returned from every mission. The pilots who chased it learned where their limits lay. Together, they defined a chapter of aviation history that remains unmatched, a reminder that sometimes the most decisive victories are achieved not by confrontation, but by choosing a battlefield no one else can reach.